So, this Sunday, most of the youth in our church are out at Camp Patton Springs. This is a weekend-long event that I and so many others in our congregation attended as a kid. And although the beads, the shirts, the music, and the activities are all impressive, I'm equally impressed that this event started out as a mere idea in the minds of two of our congregation members, Stan and Judy Bienick. Stan and Judy took this idea of a weekend-long camp for the youth of our church and community and turned it into a yearly event that has been going strong for over 40 years. That, my friends, is amazing. For a while now, I've wanted to preserve this story in some way, record it. And the opportunity presented itself when Pastor Mary asked me to make a remote sermon about Camp Patton Springs. And so for the past week, I've been doing interviews. I interviewed 12 people in total, all of who were involved in camp in some way, shape, or form. And from these interviews, I not only learned about the history and impact of camp, but I also got to take away some lessons too. One of which I hope to share with you today, which is this idea of how camp can teach us to live as one. And so without further ado, let's talk about the history. So, to learn about the history of Camp Patton Springs, I called in the two people who started it, Stan and Judy Bienick. Here's Judy Bienick giving me the basics of how camp started in 1981.
When we first joined the church, we had been members for about a year or so, and they had been doing a camp that was not called Camp Patton Springs. They were doing a day camp out in Whittier at one of the members' properties, and we were approached by a lady who was a wonderful member here for a lot of years, Betty Booth, and she said, "We really would like to expand this for a weekend camp, but we don't have anybody who can do it, and I'm too old and I can't do it." So I said, "You have experience working with kids. Could you do it?" And our reaction was kind of, "Well, we don't know, but we'll give it a shot."
So how'd you guys settle on the location of Camp Patton Springs?
Well, we knew that there was a district camp over in Franklin called Patton Springs. It was owned by Patton Springs United Methodist Church. So we contacted them about having it there, and they said, "Sure, we'll charge you a minimal amount of money to use it every year." And to explain, we had to have a building that was big enough to house maybe 45 people.
Yeah.
And the old building had a great big huge dining hall, which was a great place to have dinners, and we'd sing and we'd have all kinds of activities in there. And we had a kitchen right off of that. And then we had bathrooms, of course, and then we had two dorms that were right next to each other, a wall separating the girls and the boys' side. And staff and children all slept in those dorms.
What were some of the challenges when you were starting up camp?
The fact that we'd never done it before. We had camps for Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts and things like that, but we had never done a church camp before.
Despite never doing a church camp before, Stan and Judy found ways to bring Jesus into the activities.
I guess our approach was to give them a little bit of Jesus and some God unknowingly. You know, it's what would just seep into them, kind of. We had Bible quizzes for which you get a bead.
Right.
You know, not if you're the best Bible person, but if you could answer the questions on the questionnaire, if you're researching your Bible. They thought they were just coming to camp to run around in the woods and have fun. But we figured out ways to squeeze a little Jesus in there too.
In addition to the aforementioned challenges, there was also the challenge of food preparation.
Yeah. Have you ever cooked a whole pot of pasta and then you weren't ready to use it yet? Because all it does is turn into
mush.
Yes.
And the challenge to all camps, weather, as was the case in 1985 or 1986.
That was the year that we had camp, and it rained the whole time. And you can't do a whole lot in the rain out in the woods. And so we were all kind of brainstorming, all the adults, what in the world are we going to do with all these kids all weekend long? And we had a hailstorm that year, and the kids were like sitting at the windows watching, going, "Golly." You know, they just were absolutely fascinated that we had a hailstorm.
So after 13 years of leading camp, Stan and Judy passed the job on to Linda and Bill Haggard. Linda was the director and Bill was a group leader. Here's Linda talking about how she became camp director.
It came about as part of my job description. I was hired as the director of Christian education here at Sylva First, and part of that was to work with children and youth, obviously. And a big part of what the children and youth did once a year, annually, was to go to Camp Patton Springs. My job as camp director was to plan it out, recruit all the volunteers, do a sign up for families, for children. It was talked about in my interview for the position and talked about as one of the key things that the church wanted to see continued.
Right.
Well, my role at campus was to support the director, obviously, to support Linda in anything she needed. And I did a few years coordinating the meals and the food and the snacks and all of that. Dickie Woodard and I actually spent several years together leading the oldest group of kids, and that was a wonderful experience.
Were there any things that you changed or added to camp as you were going along?
I'm sure we made some minor changes and tweaks to some things that I think different personalities bring as something like this evolves, but no major changes that I can remember.
Yeah, I can think of two probably major tweaks. Bill,
Okay. Never mind.
Or minor
There were
tweaks.
two.
Maybe minor tweaks. So you can see Bill's got his beads. Mine are at home, and I think maybe we upped the game a little bit on beads.
Yeah.
We had people like Kathy Robertson there, and she and Diane Crisp. They would volunteer, and they would really work on making sure that each of the adult leaders in their age group had plenty of beads to give out to their campers. I think we added a few more bead categories, which the kids loved. And then the feedback that we got from the adults, some of the adults when we took over, was they wanted the menus to expand and, have more food offered and, more variety of foods and stuff like that. So we tried to tweak that a little bit too.
During Linda and Bill's time at camp, the camp grew from 30 to 40 people to over 100 people by the end. That came with challenges considering the size of the original Camp Patton Springs.
We outgrew the facility.
Right, yeah.
And that was a challenge, but Linda maintained that we will not turn any child away from camp. And I really respect that decision. So, some folks started bringing campers and bringing tents and that type of thing, and we figured it out.
Yeah.
And the lines were a little longer for showers and all that kind of stuff. But that was never, I don't think, a bad memory for anyone because the camp itself was just so full of fun and love.
After a wonderful 11 years of leadership under the Haggards, the next person to take on being director was John Brown.
I came here in '05, I believe, to be director of Christian education. And one of the first traditions I was told about, people said, John, if you get rid of everything else, there's one thing you can't get rid of, and that's Camp Patton Springs. And so I was told right from the get-go, this is something we got to keep going. And so I was excited to see what it was about. And I think the very next thing they told me was there's this one small tad bit of an information you got to know about Camp Patton Springs. It's been condemned. So I had the immediate challenge of trying to figure out where can we do Camp Patton Springs, because Camp Patton Springs has been shut down.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of ask around and find out what Camp Patton Springs was all about. And I heard, basically the camp was a building in the woods. And I thought, that's interesting. People care so much about this camp that was a building in the woods. But the more I learned about it, the more I learned that it was much more than about the facility. Yeah. So we hurried to find a location, and we found Camp Toccoa, thankfully.
So I guess along that line, you've already mentioned one of these, but were there other challenges that you had to kind of overcome as you were working as camp director?
I think, just making, one of the big things that Camp Patton Springs does, we let, the campers kind of divide up into their age groups and make their home in the woods. And I heard about this home in the woods thing, and I was like, man, that sounds like that could be pretty destructive to property. Kids like cutting down branches and trees, and But so that was a challenge to make sure Camp Toccoa was okay with us kind of mauling their woods there and these home in the woods, which ended up not being a problem at all.
So the next camp director I interviewed was Jennifer Long, who is Stan and Judy's daughter. She's known as the longest attender of camp, being present nearly every year since its start. So I was curious how many years that was. So Jennifer, how long have you been going to camp?
35 years. So I started in 1981 when it started, and then went away for a couple years to go to college and came back as a volunteer for a long time now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So you eventually became camp director as well. So how did that happen?
Well, after John Brown left, we decided that it was probably a good idea that if we had someone who was real involved in camp take over for a little while we found a new youth director and things like that, instead of just kind of throwing it at them. So I took over until Jessica was able to get up and running and have Owen and be ready to take over camp.
Wow. So while you were camp director, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
It's always a challenge when you're dealing with so many different types of people.
Right.
You have kids from all over the community, some that you don't know and some that you do know. The kids are inviting their friends, and so you're getting kids who perhaps have never been in a Christian environment. They've never been to church camp. They don't really know much about God because they don't go to church. To me, I always thought it was hard to try to reach those kids to make sure that they understood why camp was so important to the person who invited them.
So the final camp director I interviewed was our current one, Jessica Green. Here is her talking about how she got her start as director.
In 2015, it was my first experience at Camp Patton Springs as a volunteer. And then that fall, I came into the role of Director of Spiritual Formation for Children and Youth. And I remember Jennifer Long coming to me at the 9 o'clock contemporary service and said, well, since you're doing youth and children's ministries now, how do you want to direct camp? So I became the camp director in 2016. I've been doing so ever since. The only camp I have missed was 2017 when I was on maternity leave with Owen. But I helped do a lot of the logistics leading up to it.
So were there any things that changed while you were camp director?
Yeah, so in 2018, we were noticing that there were a lot of younger siblings that wanted to be a part of camp. And so we introduced day camp. And day camp, we invite kids that are pre-K age up to rising first graders to come and have a little taste of Camp Patton Springs.
So do you have a favorite activity that happens at camp?
I really like Friday night Vespers with the candle, like the little electric candles. It just kind of sets the tone for the weekend. And then that way, it's a lot later than a lot of kids get to stay up at night. It's probably like 10:30 at night. And for me, it's just a good moment to pause and, reflect and thank God for having the opportunity to lead these group of kids.
So now that we've covered the history and directors, let's talk about the things that make camp work. Music, beads, shirts, and activities. Let's start with the music. For this, I called in the people who really got this started, Patrick and Jeannie McGuire.
The music was very important from the beginning. And Stan knew how to play some guitar, I'm not sure how much, but he led the music. He and Judy were doing a lot. They were doing the food. Stan was doing the music. I mean, it was a lot for him. I think when I came into it, Stan again recruited me kind of for the music, and I was happy to help. I could play the guitar pretty well, and I could sing, and so I didn't mind being in front of people.
So I understand that you guys were responsible at least for the creation of our Camp Patton Springs songbook we have over there. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Stan gave me some songs, and as we learned more songs, Jeannie wrote them down, typed them in for us, and then she put together a master songbook for the kids to have.
Right. It taught me a lot about Microsoft Word. But yes, we did, and it was real important to us for the children to be able to read it, because some children had never been there and they didn't know it. If they had the words in front of them, they kind of did it. But once they sang them a couple times during camp, it was very exciting. They got real excited.
Then I asked them where they got the songs from for the book.
We were doing some stuff with other camps or involved with, I don't know, the Cullowhee Methodist was involved some, and I don't know, I don't know where I got those songs.
I don't either.
I would just hear them, and
Could have
I think that might fit with camp, and then we'd just plug them in.
Could have been Emmaus.
It could have been Emmaus, because that we were very involved with Emmaus at that time.
So now let's talk about the beads. This is a tradition that was started at the beginning of camp by Stan and Judy. And here is Stan talking about where he got the idea from.
It's a scouting idea.
Okay.
It's not at the Boy Scout camp, but at the Cub Scout day camp. We came up with the idea of wearing a lanyard and or different colored beads. Nothing like this. They were just like gold and red or green or something like that.
And this small idea was taken to a new level with the help of bead painting artists who volunteered for the camp, such as Kathy Roberson, who did this for 20 years. So I understand that you've been making beads for a long time. Were you the first bead maker at Camp Patton Springs?
No, I don't even know all of the bead makers. I know that I started after Anna Allen left, and I did it for maybe 18 to 20 years until Julia Hartbarger Duvall stepped up and said that she'd like to take over.
Wow.
Hoyt and I were talking, and I was thinking how many beads that I probably painted, and if it were 20 years and I did 500 a year, it's like 10,000 beads.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, I thought that was a high estimate. But then the current bead maker, Julia Duvall, reminded me of all the types of beads.
Going along with Camp Patton Springs traditions, we keep our beads the same year after year. You have the individual awards, you have the group awards. Of course, your name bead that every camper gets, when they first arrive. And then after your first year, you start getting year beads. So year 2 through whatever Jennifer Long is on, like 40, 38, something like that. Everybody gets, like your music bead, art bead, I know my Bible bead, and then of course the theme bead. That's always my favorite one to work on because it just kind of goes along with, the theme, and I try to, keep it as close or be really creative with it.
Surprisingly, the bead makers aren't the only ones who make beads at camp.
So I understand that it's not just the bead makers who make beads at camp, but it's also the counselors sometimes and other people as well?
Right, right. Each night after the campers went to sleep, the leaders would get together and paint beads, and sometimes it would be until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning that we'd be in there painting beads.
Right, so they would make a group bead per se, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And that would change every year as well, right?
Yes, depending on what the theme was,
Yeah.
or depending on what the children were like.
I was curious if beads were painted differently in the early days of camp, and got a surprising answer.
A lot of the beads were painted with toothpicks, and I did not use a toothpick. I used paint pens and markers, but I never used a toothpick.
So when you say toothpick, is that
Like they would just dip the toothpick in the paint and use that for a paintbrush.
Oh, interesting.
Well, if you're painting 500 beads, you're not going to use a toothpick. That's going to take way too long.
So this led me to ask why the beads are so important to camp, and Mary Hartbarger had a really nice answer to this.
There's a memory with every single one of these beads every year. So this is like a trophy when you walk around with your beads. And everybody is so careful, and if anybody's necklace breaks, everybody scrambles to help them catch their beads and to go find string and to tie it up.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, no matter what, there's not a jealousy with the beads. Everybody knows there is a Christian camper, there is a lightning bolt for each age group.
Yep.
And then the Z beads, of course, everybody gets if you go to sleep, which is very rare. So I think this is, whoever came up with this idea, I'm sure it was Stan and Judy, but this has been awesome because the kid, it's their way of saying, hey, look what I have accomplished. And they can see it, but it's not bragging.
Yeah.
It's just saying, this is what I've been able to do. These are my memories. This is what camp's about. And these are very, very neat, very important.
So let's talk about the camp shirts. You've probably seen them already since everyone has worn them in this video. The design was actually created by Stan Bienick. Here he is talking about it.
I was at a retreat called Walk to Emmaus, and I was sitting there doodling instead of paying attention. When I was looking out at the mountains, and I was thinking to myself, boy, it'd be nice. I didn't design this just for camp. I just was doodling, and then I got back and realized this would make a great cross for Christ and the mountains we live in. And as they say, the rest is history.
Each mountain is also a cross.
Yes, it is.
An
Each
individual
mountain's a cross. So we're built
makes the mountains.
on faith and on the Word of God and on Jesus Christ. And so that's one thing I've asked, that we never take away the design, if you would please. It's not copyrighted or anything, but just as a
reminder where we came from.
It does. It does matter. It doesn't matter where we came from.
And there have been many designs over the years. And to show them off, Jennifer Long made a quilt of her old camp shirts that I got to use as the backdrop for this video. This is a beautiful tapestry or rug you've made.
Yeah. So we used to hang the shirts up on hangers, and it just was a lot.
The shirts also have the useful quality of being a way to connect with former campers and make new ones, as Jessica explains.
I've been in the grocery store, and I've had a Camp Patton Springs shirt on, and I've had people come up to me who are, in their 30s or even 40s. And they're like, hey, I went to Camp Patton Springs as a youth. And so I've tried to recruit some of those kids to come along as legacies.
Yeah, because this is literally an advertisement when you wear it.
Exactly. Yeah. It is an advertisement. So, and it's fun to answer questions about and to be able to share just the special thing that Camp Patton Springs is.
And this brings us to our final thing that is important to camp, the activities. Let's first hear from a few of our current camp attenders to see what they have to say is their favorite. Do you have a favorite camp activity?
Building the campsite. Making the forts outside. Going in the lake.
The lake. Okay, that's a good one.
Building the campsites. That's just my favorite part.
Building the campsites, yeah. I just like going outside. And I like building the forts.
The forts.
And doing rec.
Rec and forts, those are two good ones. You might have noticed that there was one vote for the lake and rec, but a surprising amount of votes for building the campsite or home in the woods. Considering that there are so many activities such as Vespers, lightning bolt race, crafts, skits, and the campfire, I was surprised at the impact this activity had in the minds of our campers. So I had a few people explain home in the woods to me.
Okay, so the home in the woods is we do not camp outside. Like I said, we're in cabins. But those brave group leaders will take their group out and find a place that they can make a meeting spot for their group. So they'll have 3 areas: a nature center, a worship center, and then a campfire area.
And Home in the Woods did create some friendly rivalries between the groups, as Kim Woodard, a camp leader for the youngest group, and Dickie Woodard, a leader for the oldest group, explain.
So my favorite activity was probably the campsite.
Building the campsite,
because they would get so excited, and they'd get so mad when they'd been there the second year, and they'd come back and say, "Those big kids got our campsite." I'd say, we're going to have to run faster.
You got to be faster.
Because I had so many first-time campers, like building your campsite, and it could have been 10 feet away from the main building, but they didn't care. And so many of those kids had like never cooked over a campfire and stuff, stuff like that. So it's going to be our place, and we get judged on it. So they were real into catching critters, like salamanders and stuff like that, because we always had the best critters.
Yeah, they did. And I was always amazed at just how much would get done up there in a short period of time.
Yeah, we didn't have long.
Whenever everybody decided to do something, I mean, there were trails raked and lean-tos and fire rings and benches, and you guys did a lot. I mean.
So now that we've covered how camp came to be and what camp is, let's look at the lesson that camp can teach us. I asked the people I interviewed how God shows up for them when they are at camp, and these are a few of the answers I got.
Just with those kids, with the older ones looking after the younger ones, and that's the neatest thing. It's not just a bunch of kids. It's almost like a cohesive group. I mean, they all get together and they all like brothers and sisters.
The way I saw God move the most was probably just watching people love each other. When I first heard about camp and the way it was laid out, and you had all these, I mean, the home in the woods things was kind of weird, you know.
Yeah.
But then I heard, oh, it's like second grade through high school seniors, and I'm like, well, how do you mesh all that? But it just made sense when I went the first year. It was like, man, this just works. Everyone just comes together, and it's like a big family.
When we come to camp, it doesn't matter older, younger, everybody's just one big family, and all the older kids watch out for the little kids, and the adults get to have fun with, their children, also, just the children in the community, and just, get to help them explore their relationship with Christ.
Just in those relationships and how people are able to interact with others that they wouldn't interact with necessarily.
If you noticed, each of these answers talked about this idea of the camp being a family and that connections were being built between everyone at camp to create a unified whole. This, in essence, is what I was talking about at the beginning of this video, the idea of living as one. So in order to learn how to do this, we need to figure out how this works at Camp Patton Springs. Lucky for me, our camp photographer and group leader, Patrick Frazier, had some great observations about this.
I think the biggest thing is that the kids are almost the leaders. There are adult leaders and everything, of course, and we're leading the groups, but the kids are the ones that are leading the camp. The kids are the ones making the experiences of camp. The adults are just kind of directing them and making sure they don't get hurt and kind of keeping everybody on schedule. But the kids are the ones making connections, making lifetime friends, making lifetime memories. One of the best parts we do at camp is friendship beads. And so you see these kids that, even though that we've only been there from Friday to Sunday, and on Sunday when we're doing these beads, they're in tears as they give out friendship beads to their new friends that they made not even 2 days ago. And so you really get to see God at work through just the youth and how they come together and just their connectivity and the spirit of camaraderie that they have. It's not a camp that is everything that we're doing is based on the Bible and all things. It's really just building a connection with the youth and the church, and God's kind of the overarching theme, but they're the ones that are directing it.
So the point I'll emphasize from this is that the adults set out some activities and structure for the camp, but left room for the youth to create and make choices. This is something that resonated with our campers, as evidenced from their favorite camp activity being the home in the woods. Here the campers are given some structure as to how to complete their campsites, but also given a lot of room for creativity and expression. So along those lines, it is interesting to see what happens when there is free time in a camp like this. And Mary Hartbarger points out the following.
All of the free time stuff the kids really seem to enjoy, and they all pull in the little ones. They don't like all the older kids go here, group 1 or group 2 or group 3. They're all in there together.
Yeah.
And everybody helps everybody out and includes everybody.
So as Mary pointed out, something amazing. Because the groups are all together during these less structured times, and there's a chance to build relationships among different ages. So next we must ask, how are these relationships built? I think that Jeannie McGuire has a good example of this.
I think it would be through the eyes of a camper, whether they were in group 1 or 3, that was a little shy, a little hesitant to get dirty or whatever, and another camper reaching out and involving that person in things that go on, and you watch that connection evolve. You see campers from group 3 reaching down to campers in group 1, and just that kind of cementing a relationship.
So, this is a key point here. In order to build a relationship, one has to reach out to someone and involve them in their own life. When we do this and teach someone else about God, we make the scriptures come to life. And this is something that happens at Camp Patton Springs to make everyone so successfully live as one for a weekend. And to emphasize this, here's Mary talking about how the kids at camp get to understand the scriptures they learn at a deeper level.
For the kids, they learn their scriptures and they see it in action.
Right.
You know, Christ is not just a piece of paper with a bunch of words on it. They actually see it, because it's not that we've just spoken these words, we've acted out these words.
Yeah.
We've shown what we mean. We've shown the love. We've shown the kind and caring. And then checking in on people later. You know, they always send out Camp Patton Springs the cards to let everybody know, you know, thanks for being at camp, we had a good time, and then we hope to see you next year. And a lot of friendships are built from that. And some people come back to our church because of Camp Patton Springs.
So the final thing that adds to this unity is the fact that the older campers set good examples as role models for the younger campers. And this is best explained by group leader Dickie Woodard.
When those younger ones are watching those older kids, you can watch it all weekend. And that, I think that's you know, one of the neatest things about it. And not only were the young kids watching, the older kids, they could sense, ooh, this is a different audience. This is somebody I've got to show something.
Yeah.
I've got to be somebody that I really need to put some thought into this.
Yeah.
And it was pretty
And
interesting
everybody
to
was
watch.
very well behaved.
Yeah, they were for the most part. Rarely disappointed. Often surprised, but rarely disappointed.
Right.
So, there's the things that make this idea of living as one work. Letting the unexpected people have leadership, reaching out and involving others, and being a role model of Christ-like behavior for others to follow. So hopefully we can implement some of these things into our daily lives so that we can help others feel the love and spirit of Christ in their own lives, even if they aren't at a place like Camp Patton Springs. And by doing this, hopefully we can bring the kingdom of God that much closer to being a reality here on earth. Before I end, I would like to thank Patrick Frazier for allowing me to use his wonderful photos and videos of camp, and for archiving the old photos from the early days of camp. I want to thank all the wonderful people I got to interview last week. I learned so much from you, and I'm sad I only got to use small snippets from each of your interviews. Just so everyone else knows, this video really only scratches the surface of the history and culture this camp has to offer. Finally, I'd like to apologize to all those other amazing people who have been heavily involved in camp over the years, but due to time constraints this past week, I didn't have time to interview. A few names that come to mind are David McGuire, Amy Manchak, and Charles Wolfe, but surely there are many, many others. So I hope you learned something new today, and I hope that you'll continue to support this amazing and wonderful youth ministry of our church. Thanks so much.